Good morning. Today I present you the Catulpius tree. This is a tree that my grandfather planted. We first moved here in Texas. My grandfather came with my mother, and she has other siblings. But he found two plants that he took from Texas out of in a wooded area that he stated that it reminded him of his homeland dealing with medicine. The catalpa tree is the Indian bean tree. He planted one in our front yard and one in our backyard. And sometimes you don't understand why your family plant trees. And my mother had planted peach trees and stuff like that. But we couldn't eat the fruit as fast as they were growing because my mother had a gift of gab of growing things. And in Oklahoma, where they were originally from, they were the main sources of food and for their community. They were the main source for the meat, vegetables, and everything. And farming was common because that was something the government pretty much granted to the Native Americans, which we call the Indigenous people. That's one of the things when they gave them homestead plus land. And my grandfather lived there until his spouse died. And once she died, he was still fighting for his family land. It wasn't just where he was resided, but it was several ancestors. Their land was allotted. When you talk about allotment, children were allotted, grown folks was allotted. And the only ones that were allotted is those that were impacted by the Trail of Tears. Meaning impacted, they suffered a great loss of family genocide. They were murdered. They was pushed off their homelands. So it's not just by being pushed. They had slaughtered a lot of Native Americans. And it's always mildly told. But I'm a living... I'm one of the living last of my grandfather era because he was the last of his. So just imagine, we only knew him, and to hear his stories of what he all went through and what he endured, even though he was not in the Trail of Tears, but he was a product of it because he was birthed by his mother that was stripped from him at birth. And he was stripped from his father because of the laws. The laws pretty much was in place to separate the Native American families, and they would send them off to border schools and force them to learn language, cut their identity, their hair, their way of living and culture, because that's what they did. They conquered and to divide the family, just like many other cultures. And so when you look at just the Trail of Tears, it impacts into all generations. So imagine you're being taught that you thinking that you the third generation, and you come to find out some documents come, and now you're the sixth generation. And that's not even counting the people that may have was born in 1200, 1300, so forth. So, and then when you find out how the laws are impacted to withhold evidence about who you are because you're connected to the earth, you are the source, and it is to remain hidden because these businessmen wanted to keep it secret to other entities, other states. They wanted to keep it secret about what they had done. But reality is, when you look back at history, people say, well, why you keep talking about the past? It's not the past, it's the future. Because anytime a person do not know who their grandparents are, their great-grandparents, or great-great-great, and so on the paternal and maternal side, impacts the future. Why should we cut off not finding out where we come from? You know who you are, but you want to say dismiss and make it look like, oh, it's not necessary. Why y'all keep bringing it up? Because we're impacted. We're still searching for identities, and when you look at it, we're looking like, well, hell, why is it so many generations down? Now, it's just by the Creator is the reason my grandfather exists, because they were trying to kill him even after the Dallas behind this land. The minerals, the source of the earth. So in order to do so, they had to destroy him and his brother. His brother survived so many years and had a family, but all his children are deceased. So the only standing is my grandfather's generations of children and grandchildren and great that exist. We're considered the element of surprise because they was not expecting, or they felt like once they had attempted to try to murder my grandfather on more than one occasion when he was young, they tried to drown him. He actually was attacked by 3 men because they was trying to force him off the land, take the land. He would hide. They would call him a squirrel because he would crawl so high in the tree and they couldn't find him. He'd stay up there and sleep until it was safe to come down. And then once they did capture, they tried to drown him, and he succeeded and killed all 3 of them because he held his breath and fought for his life. He was pretty much forced away from his homelands that was given to him by his mother and his father's side. When you're speaking of allotments, I know y'all hear a lot of that. They just talk about allotments, they don't go in detail. Well, if a person is given 80 acres for a homestead, or 140 or 120, in general, those are acres of land. So sometimes, depending if they were chief or a family, so just imagine each individual plus your living child. So even the ones that died, because even our great aunt, she received a lot of land inherited down by her grandfather, even though she was deceased. So it is in abundance. So when you talking about over 1,000 acres, yes, that's why they're gonna hide it. That's why they're gonna always tell you, no, it's not yours. It is a hostile takeover for something that the government had wrote in law. Now the thing is, well, where is the federal government? Okay, when you look at the federal government, they don't enact that fast. By the time they acted, everybody either dead or have lost everything that was theirs. And when a Native American go into the state system, their voice is not recognized no different than a African person or a tribal person or an Aboriginal person of brown melanin tone. They are not accepted. They're not even considered human. So even though I may, or anybody that stands in that court system, they're not recognized no matter how much they know under the state law. They're going to apply their state laws. The state is what's operating everything. And even though they know there's federal laws in place to protect, where's the federal? Okay, we're ward of the state of the federal. We're not ward of the state, we're ward of the federal government. So is that a good thing or is it a bad thing? In a sense, it's not a good thing if they're not protecting us. They knowing these things, so what they'll do and say, well, your family sold the land. Well, that's not true. That is not true. When you do your due diligence, you'll find that several records and documents were destroyed, or they'll tell you that they were destroyed, but they were not. They were just taken into another location where you didn't have access. But when you go to the archives and different other elements of the courthouses, you will find there's multiple documents of the same type of land. You will find that even in the archives, falsified documents of signatures, of notarizations of people that was not notarized. You will find there's a lot of documentation that was pretending to go to the Department of Interior that never made it to the Interior. Anytime a Native American died, that land is not supposed to go to the state. So what they do is what they don't want to be called is colonized. So what they do is overtake land, and then they'll do it on the state level and say, oh, the Indians sold their land. This used to be Indian land. And they'll write up on the state law and think it's justified for the crimes they have committed. They have not been ever accountable for their conduct. It's like a repetition. So every time they place something in law to protect any indigenous person, it's really not to protect them, because it's always a way to get around the law, to break the law. And what they'll do is use the adverse possession. Well, there's laws for adverse possession for Native Americans too. You cannot take a property of a Native American, but it's done all the time. There's laws in place. But it's being in the right court, and what their goal is to make sure that you never make it to the right court by any means necessary. Even there will be lawyers that will take money under the table to make sure that your case is lost. Just because a case is lost behind a Native American, does not, R1 does not mean that it has been resolved. There's always an underline, because the thing is, let's wait till they die, then we'll overtake. But the law says that no native land should be taken, whether if it's in death or not. It's inherited land no matter what. Can none be sold. But we see today, long as there's oil, coal, water, any type of mineral, gold, if it's just acres for them to farm off, they don't want to be accountable as a leaser. They don't want to pay the Native Americans in the past. They did not pay the Native Americans in the past. And then what the government does is they pacify, say, well, we'll give you loyalty payments. We clearly see records on documents that saying that we're waiting for the heirs to come collect their money. When they try to come and collect their money, what they do is already have these colonizers working in their entities, telling them, saying, hey, you all don't have anything. They'll scratch out, white out, and modify the documents where it clearly says that the family inherited land. So that's why a lot of things happen. So don't get twisted and listen to what someone say. Go gather every document, because you will find truth in the documents. And a lot of documents were hidden. So I'm just going to be factual with that. I will share some documents with you all concerning this, but our journey has been more stressful than anything. But I know my grandfather, he was so angry and upset all the way to his death behind this. He tried to fight, and every time he'd go to court, the courts would not recognize him as an individual. What they'll say is that he did not show up, and it was clearly on document that he put in the right order, that he was fighting against it. But his voice was not heard. So you have to always be mindful that it's a twixt and tween, and there's more than one court. And unfortunately, people that does not supposed to be treated wrong always end up in the incorrect court.